Scott Stringer always identified as a liberal, a progressive liberal, but he doesn't like what he sees in city politics today, and he wants to change it. So how do you want to change it?
Well, look, right now, if you want to engage in politics, and politics, according to Mayor Mondami, is now a full-time occupation or preoccupation. The mayor has set up an organization to do politics, to run candidates, and that's certainly his right. Mayors usually don't get that directly involved in primary elections. And so what he's signaling to those of us in politics or people in government—
He wants more liberal people, more DSA people.
He wants his people in office, and I don't begrudge that. But what he's signaling to everybody is get involved in politics. And I want to continue to participate in the political process. And I believe that we have extremes in our government nationally and locally. We have people on the far, far left, the DSA. We have people on the far right, MAGA Democrats. And I hope that we can have a conversation to attract people to this notion that liberalism, being progressive, people who care about affordable housing, child care, and the like, can find a safe space to discuss the issues of the day.
What's the safe space?
Well, the safe space has to be people coming together and having a dialogue about issues and discussions without being called a right-winger or a left-winger. How about going back to something old-fashioned? Just liberal Democrats who care passionately about
Are we talking about moderates?
people.
Is that the word?
No,
Is that a bad word?
No, I don't think anything's a bad word if we're talking about issues, if we're talking about how do we build affordable housing? How do we make sure that in some of the discussion, we don't end up pricing out New Yorkers? That's why I commend Julie Menon, for example, when she said to Mayor Mondami, no property tax increase, because that's going to push rents up and property values that are going to push people, middle-class people out. That's why I say to people, if we're going to talk about free buses, well, we have to also analyze the impact of that. That means that we're going to take $900 million out of the transportation system. We're going to divest instead of invest in mass transit. We should discuss the pros and cons of free buses. Should people like us pay for getting on a bus? I think we should. Should poor people struggling have to pay that fare? I don't think so. But what I'm hoping for is there'll be more voices at the collective table influencing the mayor, influencing the governor. I think that kind of political activism is part of our city history, and I hope to play a role in helping to shape that.
I guess what the question is what stripe of person do you want to see at the table? You're basically seeming to say that you don't like the far left DSA, you don't like the far right MAGA Democrats, as you call them. But so you're basically saying you want somebody in the middle who's going to play referee.
I think what we're really saying is we want to create an opportunity for candidates, future candidates, young people who want to run for office. We want to give them different opportunities to find their ideology and find their footing. So for some people who disagree respectfully with some of the DSA platform, that may not be a place they want to be. Obviously, there are people in this city that do not support MAGA Democrats. They don't want to be part of that.
So do you want to run candidates? Do you want to raise money to run candidates?
I think we should be prepared as a city or political activist to follow the mayor's lead. If you disagree with the people he's endorsing, and I do disagree with some of the candidates he's selected, then I want to have the opportunity to work with other people, other organizations, to create an opportunity for politics, for campaigning.
You have to raise money to do that.
And you do have to raise money, but that means
you have to. Are you going to fund candidates? You're going to endorse candidates? What do you want to do?
I'm going to try to work with people who are like-minded, who want to be part of the political process. How that gets created is not up to me. It's about sitting with people, meeting with people, which is what I'm doing, among others, to come up with, hopefully, an avenue where people, progressives, liberals, people who sometimes call themselves moderates, can come together and say, you know what, I respectfully disagree with the mayor. And there are times I agree with the mayor, but we need more voices at the table. If you're on the extreme left and you're on the extreme right, and there's no place for a liberal Democrat, somebody who cares passionately about people who are struggling in the city, may have different ways or opinions on how to solve some of these issues. If those opinions are muted, if the mayor can say, I'm going to support my friends for political office because I owe them, well, that's old-fashioned politics. And that's not something that we as a city have always traditionally supported. We need more voices, and I hope we can provide that.
Well, you know, already there are stories about members of the business community and others who are concerned about the leftward tilt of the city and are trying to form political action committees, raise money. What's the end result of this? Is this to fund candidates, to run candidates against the mayor's candidates? I mean, what's the goal?
Look, I don't know what other folks are doing. Obviously, I'm reading the same articles. I see what people are trying to set up. It's part of our democracy, right? The first thing the mayor did upon getting elected mayor was move to set up his organization, to have his own multi-million-dollar apparatus to move his agenda.
Is that right or wrong?
Well, I think we spend so much time now focusing on elections and politics and maybe less solving government problems or bringing everyone to the table. I fear that that is the reality of our politics today. So it's not unusual that people of all different backgrounds and opinions are going to set up these super PACs and these IEs. But my view is this. I want to have a discussion about how we can build a political room where opinions, all different opinions on education, on childcare, on affordable housing, on livability.
What about
that there is a
anti-Semitism?
space, and 100% on anti-Semitism and against BDS. We need to have a space for people who feel strongly like I do on these issues, and including anti-Semitism. But you know what? You can't do this on Twitter, and you can't do this in your living room. You got to get to a political place, and the infrastructure of that has to be built out. And I am hoping that as we move forward with discussions among like-minded people, elected officials, former elected officials, that we can arrive at a good positioning, that we can have these discussions. There'll be times when we agree with the mayor. And there'll be times, certainly, that we disagree with the mayor. He will support candidates for office. We'll support them if we agree with them. But I hope there is going to be an opportunity for us also to work to support good elected officials. Dan Goldman is one of the best members of Congress this city has ever had. I disagree with Mayor Mamdani in trying to hurt Dan Goldman. We need to, if he wants to be constructive, he should go and fight Republicans, even though he seems to be best friends with President Trump. But we want to protect Dan Goldman. We want to make sure that there are candidates who have really elevated New York City. Why would we want to put them in jeopardy when there are other people we want to get rid of?
Well, Scott Stringer, we're going to have to leave it right there for now. We are back with Scott Stringer. And, you know, you did have a job once upon a time as being the comptroller of the city of New York. You know a lot about the city's finances. I wonder what you make of the present budget proposal, which seeks to raise property taxes if you don't get the opportunity to tax the rich. Good idea, bad idea? How do you feel about it?
I think this new administration, I think, is struggling to figure out a coherent budget strategy. And I think they're throwing a lot of ideas against the wall, seeing what sticks. I thought it was a mistake to talk about affordability and then at the same time say I'm going to raise property taxes without coming up with a coherent plan, both in terms of...
Look, you were both at one time in the legislature. What's the possibility that the legislature, in an election year, when the governor and every other person in state government has to run for re-election, is going to tax the rich?
I don't think that's going to happen this time. I mean, there's certainly, I think there will be more funding coming to the city from the legislature and the governor. The finances so far in the state seem particularly strong, even when the city does seem to have a deficit.
Yeah, but Carl Hasty says that they're going to have to find some revenue raisers. Revenue raisers almost always mean taxes.
Look, we'll see how that process plays out. You know, as a former legislator, pronouncements that are made at the beginning of session are never the same pronouncements at the end of session or at the end of budget negotiation. So we'll see how it plays out. I think you know this better than maybe anybody in New York City. But
I've sat there for most of it.
And so have I. But I also think that we have to be smart. If you're going to, I do not support raising the property taxes. I think Julie Menden made it clear that that's not happening.
But wait a second. So if he doesn't get taxed the rich and he doesn't get property taxes, what does he do with a budget that doesn't have any cuts in it right now?
Well, remember, I'm hoping that this is only the beginning of the process. He's now got to come back. He says he's going to find efficiencies, which is always something I've supported. Mayor Bloomberg sort of set the stage for that. You can find efficiencies without cutting essential services. That's been proven in budgets. And look, as hard decisions come to the forefront, he's going to have to make tough choices, and that's what mayors have to do.
But efficiencies almost always mean you have to reduce the size of the workforce, even if it's through attrition. So how is that? That's sort of like the third rail of politics.
Look, when I was comptroller, we used to do a budget response during the de Blasio administration, and we would put certain agencies on watch lists because we thought that we could identify savings and overspending. And, you know, we were the office that talked about outside contracts and the secret outside contracts that were worth hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars.
So you want to see that ended?
Well, I think there's legislation now that reform that in the city council, but I also think we have to look at what Mark Levine, the new controller, will speak to. He has certainly identified that we do have a budget gap that's very serious, but I do think we have to weigh in and have hearings. But look, I think the mayor has to become more transparent as to where we are fiscal in each of these city agencies. He does have to have savings. But look, we elected a new mayor to make choices, and that's what we have to live by. The mayor will come and say, these are my priorities. I believe we should spend more on NYCHA. I believe that we should implement a child care program. But I also know that we have to live within the limit of what's possible. Sometimes when you overpromise in a campaign, you come into office and you say, whoa, I didn't expect this budget situation. And that's okay, but he has to begin to think less about politics or trying to make quick campaign promises fulfilled and act like the executive who says, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. I need help from the feds, I need help from the state, but we also have to think about what our budget's going to look like. By the way, not just in this fiscal year, but, you know, we also have out-year budgetings and out-year gaps, and that has to all be strategized. Look, one of the things I criticized when I was controller was de Blasio trying to leave a legacy on a lot of his issues, and he used COVID dollars that were going to run out to fund continuing his programs and his legacy. New mayor comes in and says, whoa, 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 this is getting expensive. We now have to replace that money. And I do think we have allowed some fiscal spending that probably was not strategic, given the fact that we were running out of COVID money. So let's get smart. I do think the mayor has hired, you know, grizzled budget veterans, the budget director, Dean Foulahan, and it's up to them to come and level with us.
But look, the budget under Michael Bloomberg was $70 billion. The budget that was proposed most recently is double that. How can that possibly be? And is there some fat in the budget that should be cut? Well,
there's no question there is fat in a budget that's maybe about $127 billion, at least that's what's proposed. But fat doesn't mean you cut to the bone. You have to go agency by agency, look at efficiencies, look at what you can push off to the next budget cycle, what you have to do now, what you can do in 2 and 3 years, and how you smooth those budget items over time. There are going to have to be cuts. There always is. But there also can be projects that move forward that meet people's problems. Right now, we have an exodus of middle-class people who are leaving the city because they can't afford the taxes on their 1- and 2-family homes. Many are people of color. We just had rental hearings that excluded the 400,000 NYCHA residents who have 600,000 violations collectively in NYCHA. Why aren't we making it easier for them by doing that kind of fix-it work that will keep people in their homes?
Costs a lot of money to do that.
It doesn't cost money when you do it efficiently and when you have the infrastructure already in place. We need will, we need government passion to do this work. As a former controller and as borough president, I saw the good part of what government can do, which is meet these challenges even in tough budget years.
So what do you make of the fact that the president and the mayor met and talked about building 12,000 units of housing on the Sunnyside Yards, which has been something that people have talked about for a decade at least?
Well, look, this is the great thing about possibilities. You remember, Marcia, very well in the 1950s and 1960s when the Mitchell-Lama housing program
That was before
built.
my time, thank
Yeah,
God.
yes, but we all watched how this housing was created. It was integrated housing. It was housing that was really affordable for generations. It still is today. And we should always think about how to create Mitchell-Lama 2.0. We have 1,000 vacant city-owned parcels of land that we can build on. Sunnyside Yards has always been something everyone looks at. Obviously, we have to look at the budget as it relates.
It's very expensive to build
over
to
a
build
train
a
yard.
deck over
No
a
question.
train yard, and this is one of the largest train yards in the country.
No question. And there's nothing wrong with ambition. There's nothing wrong with going to Washington. And
The mayor wants $21 billion in federal grants. Is that pie in the sky?
I don't think anything is pie. If you don't ask, you don't get. Now, you may not get, but you have to ask. And I think it was appropriate for him to think big about that because, look, to quote somebody, in the art of the deal, if you don't get A, maybe you get B. And there's a lot of housing production that can happen. We do need federal dollars. HUD has basically stopped investing in public housing. We see the fact that we need $40 billion in repairs because there wasn't investment. And I think going to Washington and fighting for that is a fight worth having. I think the mayor was right to go to Washington. And now we'll see what happens over time. But at least we started this discussion.
Do you think that building a deck over Sunnyside Yards is a viable option, or should we be looking at other locations?
I haven't done, I'm not controller anymore, so I haven't done the in-depth analysis, but I'm glad we're going to undertake that analysis and see what the different options are. But certainly the concept of Mitchell-Lama 2, building affordable housing,
For middle class.
For middle class people, for also creating housing production. And we're seeing this in other cities. We have a real opportunity to increase supply that will eventually lower rents. We're seeing this in Austin, Texas, for example. Rents are going down. Look what's happening in New Rochelle. New York has to do its part. But look, I also think that we have to be smart about the fact that there's at least 50,000 vacant rent-stabilized units that are off-market. Landlords, small landlords, are not renting because they're having financial crises within their building. In the 1970s, it went on so far that there was real abandonment in the Bronx, and small landlords just left the property.
So how do you convince them to rent the 50,000 units?
Well, we come up with a program that allows for the rehab of those apartments, and we work collaboratively with them. If you bring 50,000 units online, if you can accomplish some truly big mega projects, if you can start with new zoning rules that the voters approve to build more housing and increase supply, suddenly we have a real shot to reduce rents, to create more housing, to make sure that we don't lose more congressional representatives in the Congress because we're increasing population. Right. And suddenly we have this. Now, in order to do this, the mayor has to be proactive, willing to maybe do some less videos and more meetings to create that opportunity. That's what we're going to push him on as we bring
less
liberals,
videos, more meetings.
More meetings, and a real opportunity to create a discourse that's not just about one extreme group or another extreme group, but imagine bringing people together to have informed discussions. And that is what our democracy calls for. When the city has been about that kind of discussion, we've done some great things with mayors who we may not have agreed with on everything ideologically, but we also make sure that we have that discussion. It's time to go back to substance, to do this kind of work. And look, we have a lot of elected officials. We need to hear policy. We need to debate that policy. Right now, if we have a disagreement, some people will say, well, wait a minute. Stringer used to be a progressive. Now he's a liberal. But wait a minute, is he a conservative? That's not the debate I want to have.
What's the debate?
I want to have a debate about how to make the city more affordable. I want to make sure that we're not divesting from the transit system. I want to make sure that my 2 children in middle school have a first-rate education, that they can go to school in the safest way possible. Yes, I don't want snowballs with ice thrown at police officers. What does that make me today? Am I now a moderate, or am I a outraged New Yorker who happens to be a liberal Democrat? I think the label orientation and the Twitter crazy has taken away the substantive debates that we need to have.
You don't want to be an outraged New Yorker?
I've been an outraged New Yorker for so long, I'm no longer considered outraged. I mean, the tradition of this city is to stand up and give opinions. I want to go back to the Ed Koch days when mayors when he used to walk into a room of 500 people, you didn't have to register, you could just scream your heart out at the mayor and he gave it right back to you. You know the rental hearings, the outrage rental hearings? It was a glorified housing clinic. Come on, step up, hear outrage, when I was organizing tenants in the Mitchell-Ama community, 500 people would get into a room and let it rip for 3 hours. And every elected official was like, hey, we hear you, we hear you. I want to go back to that.
You want a lot of outrage.
I want a lot of outrage, but I want a lot of substantive discussion. And I don't want to be cataloging people because now they're afraid to give an opinion that may be a little different than the extremes. I want people to be able to come in and say, this is how I feel.
And on that note, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you at home for joining me as well.